Hello and welcome to new and returning viewers. Today I take a look at The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And at the end of the video, I'll be talking about how this particular book ties in with the current Mars retrograde and how I made that connection because of cosmic messengers. And if you've seen some of my earlier videos, you know that I've mentioned this book before. The Four Agreements was published in 1997, and I like to mention the date that books were published because it gives us an idea of that time period, what people were thinking at the time, and with a book like this, it also helps us see that some of the older works are as relevant and helpful today as they were at the time of publication. Four Agreements is a relatively small book and a pretty easy read, but it has a lot of depth and useful information. The inside cover lists the four agreements, and throughout the book we get some more detail and explanation of how to implement that within our lives. The first agreement is be impeccable with your word. And that's a clue to why Mars retrograde ties in with this. The second is don't take anything personally. And I think many of us can agree that is much easier said than done, especially when we find ourselves facing some difficult and challenging situations. Don't make assumptions and always do your best. So what I did was write them out on a flashcard. And what I'll be doing with them is putting them around my house. The author talks about the importance of the words that we choose to use. Earlier, when I was beginning my channel, I made a video about words that we use. I'll leave it linked up above. And it's interesting that I made that video before I decided to revisit the 4 months before I revisited the Four Agreements. I do believe it's important for people to consider what they're saying, how they're saying it, and of equal importance, what impact that has on other people and the choices that the people who are listening to them decide to make. On page 4, the author talks about what I believe very much sums up social media, and in particular some events that I've seen unfolding lately. We also learn to hook the attention of other humans, and we develop a need for attention which can become very competitive. Look at me, hey, I'm here. The need for attention becomes very strong and continues into adulthood. I wanted to read that because it definitely sums up some recent events that I've been seeing. There are people who, instead of working together with others, choose to attack and belittle and don't take responsibility for their actions and in particular the impact that their words are having. It is also why I recommend, whether you're reading a self-help book or researching astronomy or archaeology or whatever the subject, I always suggest checking out a variety of different sources. I would also suggest consider why is someone putting this information out there. Another quote that comes up on page 7, which ties in with, I believe, the reason that you see some people change. Some people begin with good intentions and sincerity, and then you find yourself wondering, why did they switch gears? The author talks about, of course, as we grow up, we're learning about rewards and punishment and getting different types of attention. With the fear of being punished and the fear of not getting the reward, we start pretending to be what we are not, just to please others, just to be good enough for someone else. I've sadly seen this with some YouTubers who began their channels with great ideas and stayed true to themselves, but somewhere that ego got involved, and instead of staying true to who they were and the topics that they were covering, they started doing things that really weren't who they were and just ended up, unfortunately, ruining some of the content. The author goes on to talk about the outside dream, in other words, the world that we walk through. And he talks about things like fear and violence and stress about lack, whether that's a lack of money, a lack of friends, and how those concepts end up affecting the life that we choose to live and how we choose to get what brings us joy. He talks about the fact that we have a choice what we decide to focus on. We choose our actions and how we decide to respond to what we're seeing. We need to forgive ourselves and others for various situations that come up. For myself, I look at different scenarios as life lessons and growth. I'm not really about forgiveness because to me, it's a life lesson, so there's nothing to forgive. The point that the author makes is accept that we all make mistakes. Every single one of us have either done or said something, maybe in the heat of the moment, maybe there were other things going on. Some people tend to bottle things up and then just explode. He goes on to talk about claiming your personal power. Let go of fear, and I know that's much easier said than done, as I sometimes have anxiety attacks, and I just need to remember to breathe and calm down and move forward from there. Now, the word fear tends to get people messed up sometimes. There are different kinds of fear. If you're in a situation where you are fearing for your physical well-being based on different circumstances, that's different than a fear of the future where something hasn't even happened and you're not even in the situation. On page 25, the author talks about be impeccable with your word. He goes on to say that it's not just what, but how and when you say it. To that, I would add, it is equally important to think about the self-talk that you do. In other words, the messages you're telling yourself. Are you saying that you're worthy, that you're capable, or are you giving yourself negative messages? That is equally important to what you're hearing, particularly if you're someone who's on a lot of social media and if you tend to follow the news, which I personally don't. Or I should say I rarely check into the news because I just find it's far too much fear-mongering. On page 30, the author mentions that someone hooks your attention. You believe what the person says and make a new agreement. As a result, you no longer feel or act stupid. A whole spell is broken just by the power of word. That ties in with what I was saying earlier in relation to the self-talk and being mindful of who you are talking to and the words that you're choosing to use. As I said in my earlier video about words, Do you focus on making other people feel valued and appreciated and you encourage them? Or are you someone who prefers to try and tear people down, belittle them, and make them feel worth less to make yourself feel worth more? It's a very important thing to consider and contemplate, regardless of whether that's a social interaction, if you're in business, and particularly if you work in schools with students. The author goes on to talk about gossip, which he describes as black magic as it's pure poison. On page 37, he says, "The only thing that can break a spell is to make a new agreement based on truth. The truth is the most important part of being impeccable with your word." And that comes up with what I mentioned earlier about whether you're reading a post, reading a book, talking to someone. Ask yourself, what is their motivation for sharing that information? Are they motivated by trying to be helpful and encouraging, or are they trying to spread fear and anger for their own twisted motivation? And on that point, I'd also like to mention about social media. And I do not have Facebook, although I used to be on it. Personally, I find a lot of the social media is just brutal in terms of drama-rama, gossip, competition, misinformation, and it's truly sad because along with that are also some amazing and incredible people out there who are trying to spread joy and positive messages, connect with other people, and just enhance and make this world a better place. So I left Facebook a couple of years ago because I just had enough. The second agreement is do not take things personally. And that is definitely easier said than done. An example that came to mind for me are the number of people who over decades have picked on me about my weight. And no, I'm not overweight. I'm actually one of those people on the opposite side of that, and I'm actually quite thin. The big deal is this. Rarely were the comments said to my face. They were typically behind my back as I was walking down a hallway or what have you at work. And I would hear things like, "She makes me sick. How can she eat like that and not gain a pound? I hope when she turns 50 she gets fat. I wish she was dead." And yes, people did say that. And no, I didn't waste my time turning around to respond to them. My point is, there are always going to be people out there who will belittle you and say ignorant things, usually not to your face. That's the whole gossip issue. The important thing is, and it took me a lot of time, but the important thing is not to take those things personally. The irony to this story is that in high school, I was not thin. I just suddenly, when I hit my 20s, either something changed with my metabolism, there were some life choices that were different, and I ended up dropping a ton of weight. And it's never come back on. So, for the people who were picking on me all those years, and I'm willing to bet none of them will ever see this, and that's okay. I'm now 58 years old, and I actually weigh less than I did in grade 8. So, sorry, folks. Didn't get fat when I turned 50. Not likely ever gonna get fat in this life. I've changed a lot personally, and I like who I am. I like the size that I am. And I don't know what's happened to you. And, hopefully things have worked out for the best. The third agreement is don't make assumptions. In other words, we don't know what is going on in someone else's day or life. Sometimes if you've been in a store and a cashier or a clerk may be a little snappy, it isn't that that's their personality. We may have just missed the customer who was very rude and ignorant to them, and they just haven't had a chance to regroup. It isn't that someone necessarily is wanting to be mean or short. There just may be a lot of other things going on at the time. And that, again, ties in with don't take things personally. There are other things going on in all of our lives all the time. And that's why I personally believe it's important to communicate openly and honestly. And that doesn't mean tell everybody that everything's going on all the time. Saying, I'm just having a difficult time right now, or saying, I just need a few minutes. An important quote on page 69 is that he says, we make the assumption that everyone sees life the way we do. It is very important to remember that, particularly when we're speaking with other people, whether it's in person or making comments behind a keyboard. Everyone has their own life experience, their own viewpoints, their own way of expressing their spirituality and what motivates them and what is important to them. So it is very important to remember that that is different for everyone. So when you're having communication with somebody, and maybe they've said something that you don't agree with, or maybe you don't understand, instead of getting upset, ask them about it. Have an open, honest conversation. It isn't about trying to change other people to your point of view or your way of life. It is about communicating and making this world a more pleasant and enjoyable experience for everyone. But we're not going to agree on everything. For example, I've been recycling and composting for decades, and that is my personal choice. I realize there are people out there who just find it easier to throw things into a garbage can, whether that's organic material or other things. And do I like that? Of course not. But that's their life. They have their reasons for doing it that way, and it's their choice. I have my life, and my composting makes a world of difference for my yard. My plants are always lush and thriving. The fourth agreement is always do your best. And depending on your life situation, perhaps your health, different circumstances, that's going to look different for everyone. So for example, and I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, years ago I had a back injury and it changed my life literally forever, and all it took was 60 seconds. During the most challenging, difficult times of that, some days my best was I got out of bed and I got dressed. Woohoo! Good day. Thankfully, as I came to grips with different things and different situations played out, and I finally got back to work and things started ticking along, not only was I getting up and getting dressed, I was going to work. I had purpose every day. I was making connections. I loved my job. I was looking towards gratitude and all the wonderful things that were happening. And at that time, I had also started what I call a Life is Great Because list. At that time, I was reading Steering by Starlight by Martha Beck and The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. So both of those books helped me in terms of starting to feel worthwhile again, that I had purpose, and that things would start to work out. So I used it to focus on the gratitude and blessings that I had in my life every single day. And I also used it as a way to, as affirmations for what I wanted to come in the future. And I always put it in the present tense. And there were things like, my yard is lush and full. Today I saw a crow or a squirrel. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I'm mindful of the different things I see in nature because I listen to animal guides and am mindful for signs and omens. So Life is Great became my way of getting back into a positive headspace. And this all comes back to always do your best. Your best is going to be different each day, as I said earlier, about the different things going on. But it's important to acknowledge that you're doing the best you can in the present moment. On page 86, he talks about the fact that we learn by practice and repetition. As you put those 4 agreements that you make personally with yourself into play and practice them and do them in your life, you'll notice that you focus more on gratitude. You'll notice that your relationships are improving. It also gives you full control of your life. You're taking your power back and you are deciding how you're going to interact and connect with other people. And that doesn't mean that you don't care or that you don't take an interest or that you don't try to offer help to people. It does mean that you're very discerning and selective about what you choose to get involved with and how you choose to respond to that. Another important point that the author makes is that you make these agreements with yourself, these 4 agreements with yourself, for one day. You think about it in terms of, I can do this for 24 hours. Another important point is to be honest with yourself. So as you're doing an assessment and taking a look at yourself and your life, maybe the words you use or how you respond to situations, it is important, 1, be honest. 2, don't judge. The only way that you can move forward, fine-tune what you need to fine-tune, or change what you need to change is by taking a hard, honest look at yourself. And yes, you're going to find things that you need to change and improve. It's part of being human, and every single person has something that they can work on or fine-tune. And there's nothing wrong with that. Keep the goals realistic and manageable and take it one day at a time. This is about a lifestyle change and being kind and loving and supportive of yourself. Because the more that you come to appreciate and understand how truly valuable and worthwhile you are, other people around you start to feel and sense that and want to be a part of that. And that's how this positive energy and light spreads and grows. But it all begins with you. Have you read any other work by Don Miguel Ruiz? I did try reading one of his other books, and I have to say, it didn't speak to me the same way the 4 Agreements did. It just comes down to communication for a lot of different reasons. And part of what got me thinking was, as I was doing the notes for the four agreements, okay, what was the motivation or the reason that some of these people were putting out these various videos that were belittling and trying to undermine other people, while some are outright lying about certain situations and their role in them. And as I was trying to make sense of all of this and, what's the motivation? Why is this all coming to a head? And I happened to look out my window because I love looking at the night sky and the stars. And I happened to notice this big, bright red ball in the sky. So how does this tie in with cosmic messengers? In her book, Elizabeth Peru talks about astrology and the movement of the stars and the planets and how that impacts various things, which got me thinking, okay, what's currently going on with Mars? So when I Googled it, I found out that Mars is currently in retrograde, meaning that it seems to be moving backwards, and that it's a planet of action. So I checked out a couple of different websites in terms of, well, what does this mean? And I'll put the websites down below in case you're curious about this type of thing. So on Forbes, they mention that in early December, Mars will be the closest to Earth. The retrograde began Sunday, October the 30th, and it will continue until Thursday, January the 12th, 2023. So for those who believe in the impacts of the planets, this will be going on for a little while longer. According to astrologer Lisa Stardust on Refinery 29, she says that people are unable to control their actions and that this applies towards communication. In other words, the internet trolls, keyboard warriors, and bots will be causing a lot of unnecessary drama. Personally, I think drama is unnecessary, period, and bullying online, which definitely speaks to some of the things that I'd seen recently. And according to Cafe Astrology, it's a time to reassess current projects or passions. It's a time to do some personal work, which ties in with the four agreements, and look at how we pursue what we want from life. The four agreements, certainly be impeccable with your word, got me thinking about what is going on in some of the different situations that I've seen playing out. I just happened to look out that window and see Mars, which have led me to doing a search on Mars and retrograde. For those who are also interested in such things, we have a Mercury retrograde that will be coming up December 28th to January 18th. And that means, according to some people, that there are challenges with communications. So, if you've watched this far and you follow this type of thing with retrogrades and planets, let me know down in the comments below. Upcoming will be George Newry's Worker in the Light and Talking to the Dead. If you're curious about what I have coming up, I have a video on that. Be sure to check it out so you'll see the different titles. And be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you know when I upload content that may be of interest to you. Until next time.